Hello and welcome everyone to this Free Friday webinar, part of our long series. We will have a short presentation followed by Q&A as usual, and please do use the Q&A function. The chat is also open for any technical issues, so if you want to send links to something. The webinar is automatically captioned, so you can just use the CC button in Zoom to get the captions. And as usual, this webinar is going to be recorded or is already recorded and will be published on our website and the YouTube channel. And if you have a registration, you will get a link to the recording automatically as soon as it has been published. We do have all the microphones muted to avoid background noise, but there is always a possibility to ask questions just using the QA function. And I want to also start with apologizing for Friday 2 weeks ago, where we had to postpone the content because of illness. We have never done that before, so I think once is okay. But that webinar will happen on the 27th of March instead. But now we are moving into today's webinar. If we can have the next slide, please. Which is Accessible Research from Design to Dissemination. And this is presented by our research strategist and actually boss of the whole research department, which is the core of what we do, Sara Kjellstrand, who will share both our experiences and knowledge in how we think that accessibility fits into to research and should be done. So please, Sara.
So just briefly about myself first, I'm a research strategist at Funka Foundation, and I also work a lot on cognitive accessibility. And what we do at the Funka Foundation is strategic assignments, so working on policy briefs, for example, research projects. So we both run our own research projects in Sweden and in the European Union, often EU funded. We also work as an accessibility partner in larger projects, often under the Horizon program, EU-funded programs, so where we work specifically with accessibility parts of broader projects, and we do trainings. And in our trainings, we usually use insights from both the assignments and the projects. So just first start with the problem, and then we'll see if we can solve it. But there is a gap in research impact, and it's well known since a long time that a lot of research outputs are actually not used in the way that they could be, because they are not made to be used and to make a difference. Or are they? So there could be a challenge both in engagement, meaning that it's difficult to engage with the audiences that could have used the projects and the research outputs. And there is a challenge also in usability, meaning that the project results in itself is not usable. So what is this? Because every researcher wants that the products and the outputs are used in any way. So how come there is still this gap? Parts of this is because a lot of people do not pay enough attention to accessibility. At least this is the way we see it. So accessibility can increase the impact both by removing barriers to participation in the actual project and also by removing barriers to access. And for a lot of people, they think that, well, my research project is only for this very specific audience, so I don't really need accessibility because we can't see any accessibility needs within this. But you don't really have to solve everything for everybody in the project, but just thinking about accessibility helps to remove these unnecessary barriers to participation. And also, everybody is in need of accessibility in some way. So just thinking about it will automatically help you think more about the user needs and the wider implications of how your research is being used. And by thinking about users and accessibility systematically, you will also have a more natural link to impact. So why does accessibility matter? Because of better applicability of the research. So if you have forced yourself, so to speak, within the project to think more about the wider range of users that could use your project results, then you will also have solved some of the issues that may be linked to real world problems, how you actually can use the results in real world solutions and scenarios. You will already have thought about that within the actual project and within the research you do. So then you automatically have easier to apply the research once you have done it in real life scenarios. Also, accessibility is about users and about wider outreach to different audiences. So by integrating accessibility and user-centered design in your project idea, in your thinking, in your way of doing projects, you will also have the instinct to reach out to wider audiences that could also have the use of your product or the research output. So even if you think that your little research is sort of contained within a bubble and that a certain group will be able to use it, this doesn't mean that only this group could in fact be interested in it. Innovation often comes from project results and outputs and products being used by different audiences in different ways, and then they will find new ways to use it. Accessibility also helps to do a stronger foundation of the actual product and the research output. Because when you work with users and when you work towards different types of users and different needs, then you're constantly confronted with different ways of seeing things, different ways of using and interacting with your research. And then you will find gaps and find blind spots that you haven't thought about, and you will solve them within the project. And that also strengthens the whole applicability and the whole foundation of your, not just the results, but also of your research methods. And also, of course, there is the funding alignment. Now, I think that every researcher has now and then tried to shoehorn your idea into a description of a task or description of a project that the funding instrument has put out there, which is fine. But what evaluators really want to see, even though it's your project and you try to adapt the best you can, what they really want to see is that it's being used consistently and that there is an impact. And this is especially true in Horizon funding and in the European funding, where the impact section is taking more and more precedence over the other quality and excellence evaluation criteria. So aligning with accessibility is also very close to responsible research and innovation and all these concepts about ethics and society, impacts in society that and different funding organizations usually put quite a lot of emphasis on. And just to recap, you probably already know this, but accessibility benefits everyone. It's not just designing specifically for a small minority somewhere. People with permanent disabilities are 25 to 30% of the population, so it's not just a very small minority, it's quite broad. And also everybody can have a temporary disability, and there are also situations that are disabling in different ways. And one of the examples is that if you have a digital interface, then perhaps you think of your user sitting in their own office or somewhere using it in a calm environment, and that's all fine, but usually people are out and about, and then the environment around us is quite distracting and disabling. So just having a clean interface that is easy to access, easy to understand, easy to use will benefit everyone. So how do you do accessibility in projects? Well, it goes throughout the whole project. Sometimes you still see actually that people try to test something with users at the end, and they haven't thought about the design from the beginning, which means that they see a lot of problems and it's too late to do anything about it. So you need really to start with the design phase first. So to have user-centered design and then accessible ways of interacting with users within your research, and also accessible formats and a variety of formats when you do the dissemination. And if all of that has followed user-centered research and accessibility, then the impact and outputs will also be accessible. Starting with the project design. First, you have to do the specifications. So when you're trying to build something, when you try to conceive of the research output that you're going to do, you need some sort of roadmap and specifications. And could be very difficult if you're not used to working with accessibility to start really by the legal requirements. Maybe you've heard of the standards such as EN 301 from Fornan, and you see that it's 70 pages plus with a lot of details. So it feels like quite a difficult thing to start with. So instead, what you can do is to just start with the universal design principles. They are fewer and they're very common sense, and it gets you thinking about the essence of accessibility, that is different user needs and how persons can use your product and use your research output in different ways in different situations. And then you will need to work with the users throughout. So you need a plan for that. And this is why you start to engage with these different user groups and partner also with broader user groups, because probably you don't really have all the confidence and the competence and the lived experience of all different types of challenges that users can meet within your team. So it's good already in the beginning to start to think about how you can create partnerships that lasts throughout the project, both for engaging with users and also to put out the results and do dissemination in the end. User-centered design is really at the heart of how you work with accessibility in the research project. And it's not just about who uses the results, it's also about who contributes to the research, in the sense that who has a say in the way that the project is being steered. Who do you include in your team? Who are the partners in the project? And also, who are the advisory boards? And then there is the question of who will participate in different stages of the research. For example, by answering surveys or participating in different workshops. So the user-centered design goes through the whole sort of ecosystem of the project, in who is conducting the research, who is participating, and who will be using the results. And looking at research activities, there are several different ways. Of course, you can have many different types of activities in your research. But think about every single way that you reach out to users within the research and how you can make it as inclusive and accessible as possible. Are you using a survey instrument, perhaps online, that can be accessed with assistive technologies? How are you doing your workshops? Are you using captions? Are you making sure that everybody can be active in different ways? One thing that is pretty complicated working with users is the consent and information materials. Is it really possible to give consent if you don't understand the form? Is there a way to do it in the easy to read format, perhaps, or something a bit easier to digest? And if you're using digital tools, can they be accessed by everyone? So just to give you a short example from what we have experienced, we helped the European Commission with the study on the follow-up on one of the directives, and we sent out 2 versions of the surveys. And this is to broad audiences, so it's not to people with disabilities, it's really to everyone, professionals, a lot of it, in accessibility and in other contexts. And there was one version that was the ordinary one, and then we had the easy to read version. And most people, regardless of their abilities, actually preferred the easy to read version because it was shorter, easier to understand, and much quicker to actually go through. So when you've done your research and it comes to the dissemination, this is also a time to sort of stop and think, okay, who do we want to disseminate to and how do we do it in the most accessible way? And in the case of providing information and communicating information and results, it's a lot about giving people different choice. So you should have a variety of channels. Some people prefer to hear information, some people prefer to read it, some people prefer to interact with it in different ways, being able to ask questions. This doesn't mean that every single dissemination item that you do needs to be in every single format. It's more about the idea in universal design for learning concept that you have something for everyone so they can choose how to interact with the information. Always remember to have some type of accessible formats so that key information is available in something that is accessible in at least more than one sense. And don't forget about the message. Plain language is super important. You don't need to go as far as to do easy to read for everything, but at least try to make the messages as short as possible, get to the point, and revisit all the jargon and the different language that you use for different audiences. Some examples of accessible outputs are the websites, of course. Almost every project has a project website. And it's not only important for people to be able to access it, but also to have it very well structured. And structured websites also have another added benefit, which is that they usually receive higher rankings. And especially you get more recurrent visitors. And that's really just a common sense. If you go to a website where you can't find anything and where it's difficult and complicated to navigate, you don't really want to go back there. But if you go to a website where you have short and plain language, well-structured information that can be accessed in different ways, then also the message that you have on the website sticks, and it's more likely that you will get both referrals, so more people wanting to visit it, and also people going back to it. Reports and briefs are very usual. You always have that as an output in some way or another. And sometimes there is a necessity to have a bit more descriptions and perhaps a certain style if you do an academic paper, but not all outputs and not all reports are academic papers. And if you want somebody to find and use the product that you have or the service that you have developed, then at least do a plain language brief that accompanies the more academic papers. And videos, if you do them, caption is a must. It can also increase views by up to 40% according to some studies. And if you're not impressed by statistics, just try next time to sit somewhere, perhaps on the metro or somewhere, to access a video and not be able to have your earphones on. You will notice very quickly that captions are useful for everyone. So in the end, if you have been thinking about accessibility throughout the whole process, when you come to exploitation and uptake, it should really follow quite simply from everything that you have prepared on beforehand. So you have your digital tools that are usable with different interfaces because you already thought about that at the beginning when you did the specifications. Also, when you do training materials, think about that it could be useful for other audiences and not only the ones that you are training in your project. For example, in Erasmus Plus projects, usually you get higher points if you are able to show that your outputs can be used in a variety of different learning contexts. So this is also a reason to think about universal design for learning and accessibility in general in the training materials. And also that even if you do policy outputs, that you make them understandable using plain language so that more people can get interested in what you actually achieved. So just as a short summary, for an impactful exploitation and uptake, you need products and services that work for everyone, and also paired with understandability, that you have a communication that really reaches different audiences and have your message in plain language and easy to understand, so that people will actually understand how fantastic your project output has been. So it could be difficult to know where to start, but start with the users always. Think about who are your users, and also, even if you think that your project is only reaching and only meant to reach a small audience, are you sure that this audience is not more diverse than you thought? Bearing in mind that people can have permanent disabilities, temporary disabilities, and also be in situations where accessibility is necessary. Start your planning early and also start with simple improvements. You don't need to do the most perfect platform that is accessible for every single assistive technology ever invented and future-proofed and everything. You can just start. If you haven't done plain language summaries, do them. If you haven't used captions, start with that. And use all the free tools that are available, because there are more tools available than you probably think of. I mean, in most word processing programs, you have built-in document accessibility checkers. They may not fix exactly every single issue, but it goes a long way of making a document more accessible than if you haven't looked at it at all. There are automatic captions in most different programs, softwares, both for meetings and also for videos. And also here, don't be afraid of not being perfect. Even if there is an error, it will be much, much better than not having any captions at all, because if you don't have any captions, you exclude people. If you have a small error in it, you include people, even though somebody may get annoyed of a small spelling mistake, but they are included. And also use plain language. There are easy to read generators and that are getting better and better. But if you really want to get into that and do it seriously, you will probably need additional expertise. But there is a lot that can be done now with AI. It's difficult to do a webinar without saying AI nowadays. So, but for plain language and easy to read, there are things that can be done. And of course, it's always a challenge with resources. This is a recurring problem. But just thinking about it, being intentional about including accessibility and including different user groups in different ways and is already an improvement. So just start small and then expand gradually. So just as a final thought, our 3 best tips are to plan accessibility already at proposal stage, so it's in the project from the beginning. Pick a few outputs and do them well. And use the tools that you already have. And you probably have more tools than you need, or sorry, that you actually thought of. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for this walkthrough. And I must say I'm happy that we have 245 participants or registered participants for this webinar, which means that we have kind of a research community that is interested in accessibility. And it's also good to know for everyone that Sarah doesn't only do research for us now and is a very successful proposal writer, but she has also been evaluating projects for the Commission in her previous life. So when she says this is important for your application, that is actually true. So we have a couple of questions, but very little time. So the first question is, funding organizations rarely have reviewers with knowledge or experience of accessibility unless the funding call is specifically focused on accessibility. How can this be changed? That's an easy question.
Yeah, hi, Russ. No, but it's it's a challenge. But I think this is the way. There are two ways to think about it. This doesn't mean that if you think that there is an evaluator who will not know about accessibility, they will still know a lot about user-centered design usually and about reaching the different audiences. So it depends really on how much, on how deep you go into the level. I don't think that not having technical accessibility experts in every single evaluation is a hindrance to influencing the whole system towards more user-centered design and accessibility. It's all about how you frame it. So even people who are not experts as such in the project will still recognize a well-written proposal with a clear path on how you will actually reach people and how you will use the expertise you have to reach different audiences.
Yeah, I agree. And also there are some of the funding instruments where accessibility and inclusion is actually part of the requirements and something that you need to look into. So I think there is kind of a change going on. It's slow, but hopefully it will be even more so in the future. So the next question is about the target audiences. Do we need to have, or do you think that we need to reach all target audiences, even though our project is solely focusing on one user group?
So this is the key question. We usually get this, and in a lot of it depends on a misconception. Sometimes people say that, okay, we have patients and we don't think that these patients have disabilities. But okay, so you have a population, you have citizens, all citizens will be affected in some way. So you need to think about diverse groups, even though it may not say it specifically in the text of the call. And you don't really need to have every single diagnosis or every single fringe group, if you talk like that, covered, but just think about different access needs and different broader needs. So start by talking to some groups, and then you will build up expertise in that area, and then you can move on to others. There are a lot of overlapping needs as well. So if you start talking to one group, then you will see that, oh, in fact, now we know about this, then we can help other groups as well.
Yeah, I kind of thought about the question a bit differently, but kind of if we are doing a project only for hard of hearing people, do we also have to think about visually impaired or something like that? That's how I read between the lines. And I just think that, again, there is an overlap and you don't know how many people with multiple disabilities there are in any of your groups. So it's kind of impossible to really know. So I think we have more questions to go, but unfortunately we only have 1 more minute. So if we can have the next slides, I think we have a question slides for it, but we would like to first, if you go back one step, we always want to make sure that you do subscribe to our newsletter, and I hope my colleague will post the link to the newsletter subscription in the chat. We also have a QR code here showing if you prefer that. And we can also, another tip is to follow us on LinkedIn. Again, a link and a QR code. And then The next Friday webinar will be in 2 weeks. Next slide, please. On the 27th of March, then Malin Hammarberg, she's already back on track. So she will hopefully not be ill that Friday, and she will talk about InDesign styles and to unlock the accessibility potential of the software InDesign when you're doing creating design documents. So thank you very much for attending the webinar today and have a very good rest of your Friday. Bye bye.